Audiocast, Champlain Room, test, 1, 2, 3.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. We're going to get started. We have quorum, I see. So let me start by welcoming everybody around this table to the first meeting of the Built Heritage Subcommittee of this term. And I think a particularly warm welcome to the new members, of which Catherine McKenney is one, Mary Ann Wilkinson, who I think is joining us shortly, and I guess I'm in that category too, and a warm welcome and return to those who are coming back, who served over the last term. I think it's fair to say that in the 2 years that the committee was operating, it was a very successful committee. I thank the public members. I think you did yeoman's work, and everybody appreciated the effort. And I think the results of the committee speak volumes in terms of its success. So for that, I thank the returning members. I also thank Jan Harder, who chaired the committee with aplomb, and I have big shoes to fill, but with your help, look forward to guiding the committee over the course of the coming months and years. So, in terms of the meeting today, we have 2 agenda items that we're going to deal with, and then under other business, I want to talk a little bit about the governance report, which was approved by Council at the beginning of December, and there were some specific items related to the committee that I want to address with you and talk a little bit about the way forward. So we'll do that under other business, but before we get to the 2 agenda items, we have to do a few items of business. One is declarations of interest. Are there any? No? Great. Noted. Next item is the confirmation of minutes. Now, this was a meeting at which I did not attend, so I'll rely on the returning members to assure me that the minutes properly captured the essence of that meeting. They should be in your documents.
Carried.
Carried? Great. Okay, so let's turn then to the first item of our agenda, which is an application to alter the Charles Billings House at 187 Billings Avenue. I'm going to ask staff to come join us at the table. I think Leslie Collins is going to provide just a short presentation for us to help situate this application. And after that, we have 2 speakers who've asked to speak to the committee, and then we'll have an opportunity for discussion as well. Good afternoon, Leslie.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Just give me 1 second, please.
Sure.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Leslie Collins, and I'm one of the heritage planners with the Heritage Section of Planning and Growth Management. You will get to know me better and hear my voice a lot. And sitting next to me is my colleague Ann Fitzpatrick, who is also one of our heritage planners. Our faithful leader, Sally Coots, is out sick today, so if you haven't met her, you'll meet her next time. So the application before the committee today is an application to alter the Charles Billings House at 187 Billings Avenue. The property is designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act and located in the Alta Vista neighborhood. It was designated by this committee in 2013, and its bylaw designating the property was passed in the beginning of 2014. So I'm just going to show you a few photos to situate you to the property. This is an older photo, but it was an L-shaped building on a large lot at the intersection of Billings Avenue and Cavendish Street. The portion of the building that was designated was this portion here that I'm holding the mouse over. This portion was demolished. This portion at the back was also demolished. They were more recent additions to the building. In 2013, the property owner applied to the Committee of Adjustment to sever the property. So now the property is actually 2 lots. So this portion is gone, and it is a separate building lot that will be sold as a building lot for a single-family building. I'll show you some photos of the building. I'll just go back for 1 second. One interesting thing about this building is its orientation, and if you've read the report, you may have noticed that it is oriented away from Billings Avenue. So this is Billings Avenue, but its front door is actually here, facing this way. It's because of the age of the building, it predates the street pattern, so it was never oriented to the street because the street wasn't there. This is a picture of the building looking towards Billings Avenue. So this is the front door here that I just pointed out. As you can see, it's a 1.5-story gable-ended structure with a central gable. The windows have been covered up because the building is vacant. This is where one of the additions was that has been removed from the building. Just showing you some of the details. This is the entrance vestibule that is included in the designation, as well as this small diamond window. It is a fairly simple building. Predates, as I said, predates the road pattern. It was constructed prior to 1857. We don't know the exact date, but records indicate that there was an addition constructed to it in 1857, so we know it existed before then. By the Billings family, and was owned by the Billings family all the way up until the 1960s, when it was sold to the, it's only had 3 owners. So the current owner, the previous owner who owned it from the 60s until 2013, and the Billings family. This is the back of the building. Again, it's very difficult to take photographs of it because of its orientation and the trees and all of that sort of thing. So you can see that one portion of the building has been removed here. This is the large garage addition that formed sort of the L. So the application is before the committee today because the building is designated under Part 4 of the Heritage Act, and all applications to alter designated heritage buildings require approval by City Council. The application that's before the committee today is to demolish approximately 20% of the designated portion of the building and construct an addition at what I'm calling the rear of the building in terms of the lot and how it faces Billings Avenue. So this is the site plan. I flipped it just so I could make it larger. Billings Avenue runs here along the right-hand side of the screen. So this is the front door portion that I was talking about here in the center. The hashed portion here is the portion that is proposed for demolition. Part of the reason for that was to protect this large mature tree in the rear yard. The existing building is approximately 102 square meters, and the addition is about 248 square meters. So the addition is quite a bit larger than the existing building because it is taller than the existing as well. So here are the elevations. So this is the north elevation of the building, so looking at it from the back of the house on the top here. So you can see that the roof line is sort of irregular but mimics the existing roof line in being a gable roof with intersecting gables. A large amount of glazing, proposed to be wood clad with windows that are different than the existing windows but sympathetic in their character. And then the west facade, so this is looking at the, I'll say, the rear of the original house. So on the other side of this gable where I've got the arrow is the front entrance. So this is the portion here that has been removed at the end here. And then what you see here, this 1-story glass link, is the link between the old portion of the building and the new portion. So it's a flat roof, 1-story breezeway that links the two. And then this is the top image is if you're standing on Billings Avenue looking at the property. So you see the end of the historic building here, and then this is the new portion of the house here. So there's the little gable over the front door, the existing chimney. There's a proposal to add 2 windows, one on either side of the chimney in the historic portion of the building. And then this final image on the bottom shows looking at the front door of the building. In the entrance vestibule is here, and this is the other side of that 1-story glass link that I showed you in the previous slide. So the portion of the building to be demolished is here. As you can see, the addition to the building is proposed to be higher than the original building. To the roof ridge, it's 7.8 meters, and the existing is 6.2. I should say also, sorry, that the materials, the original building, The wood siding is proposed for restoration. Where it can't be restored, it will be replaced in kind with new wood siding to match. The windows, for the most part, are not historic in this building, so they will be replaced with new appropriate wood windows in keeping with the character of the building. The historic portion of the building is also proposed to have a completely new foundation poured underneath it. These are just a couple of perspectives to show you. Again, they, as some previous members of the committee may remember, these renderings can sometimes be slightly misleading, but they are meant for illustrative purposes. You can see in the bottom right-hand corner here, the original building is outlined in red dashed line. It's a bit difficult to see because of the light, but so it's outlined in a red dashed line, and then the addition can be seen here. So a new driveway will be brought in off of Billings Avenue. The current driveway for the property is on the other side of the house, sort of with a forecourt here in the front that speaks to this as the original entrance to the building. So, as I said, the building is designated under Part 4 of the Heritage Act. The Statement of Cultural Heritage Value is included as Document 3 of the staff report. It was designated as a rare vernacular example of the Ontario cottage style and associated with the development of Billings Bridge. And it has contextual value for its orientation away from the street. So these are the values that we're looking at in terms of how the proposal impacts the identified cultural heritage value of the property. Its heritage attributes are that it's 1.5 stories in height, has a side gable roof with a central gable, it's wooden siding, the entrance vestibule, which I've spoken about with the diamond-shaped window, the other window openings, and its orientation away from the street. So when we're evaluating these applications, we use the document that I just described, the Statement of Cultural Heritage Value, but we also use a document called the Standards and Guidelines for the Conservation of Historic Places in Canada, which is a Parks Canada document that has been approved by City Council as the standard for projects, for assessing these applications. So I have picked out the standards that are applicable to this project. Standard 1, conserve the heritage value of the historic place. In this instance, the building is 80% of the original building is being retained. The heritage attributes are being protected, and the location of the addition at the rear protects the contextual value, which is the building's orientation away from the street. Standard 10, repair rather than replace character-defining elements. And as I just said, the existing wood cladding, chimney, diamond-shaped windows will all be repaired and retained. Standard 11, conserve the heritage value when creating any new additions to a historic place. So in this instance, staff have determined that the addition is compatible through its massing of materials. The historic building remains the dominant presence, and the glazed one-story link provides a clear differentiation between the new and the old. Standard 12, and again I've removed some of the words because it's very long, but create any new additions so that the historic place will not be impaired if the new work is removed. In this instance, demolition of 4 meters of the existing building will have a negative impact on the massing and will impair the character of the building if the new work is removed. But the proposed glazed link allows the historic building to read as a distinct entity. So while it doesn't completely meet that standard, it is deemed to be appropriate. Document 7 of the staff report is a cultural heritage impact statement prepared by Robertson Martin Architects for the applicant. The conclusion of the CHIS is that demolition of approximately 30% of the original structure is a negative impact, but it is deemed acceptable given the existing conditions. And the rest of that statement goes on to talk about the condition of the existing building, the fact that it has been neglected for many, many years with deferred maintenance, et cetera, and really needs a lot of work. So this you will note says 30%, and as a result of this statement and working with the applicant has reduced that amount of demolition to 20% of the building. In terms of consultation, Councillor Cloutier is aware of the application and is here today. Heritage Ottawa was notified of the application, and its comments are included in the staff report, and I believe you also have been circulated further comments from Heritage Ottawa. Neighbors within 30 meters of the property were notified, and I believe there have been several comments submitted. And the Faircrest Heights and Alta Vista Community Associations were notified of the application. I know there were comments from the Alta Vista Community Association submitted to Rosemary. So the staff recommendation is to approve the application to alter, issue the heritage permit with a 2-year expiry date, and delegate authority for minor design changes to planning and growth management. And just for the benefit of the new members, the minor design changes sometimes emerge through the building permit process. If this application is approved, this would help the applicant not have to come back through the whole approval process again to change a new window or something small. If the proposed change changes the intent of the approval, then they would have to come back through the process again. And that's it. I'm happy to answer any questions of things that I may have missed and assumed that you knew, but maybe don't know.
Okay, thank you very much, Leslie. So over to committee members. Are there specific questions or comments that anyone has? Sandy?
Thank you very much. Leslie, one of the heritage attributes of the property is listed as the stone foundation. And I'm very familiar with stone foundations. Over the years, we've restored many of them, including ones from the 1840s. So I'm a little disappointed in the wording of the report where it says that new foundation will ensure the ongoing stability of a heritage resource, which implies that getting rid of stone foundations somehow is a positive feature in old buildings, which I would very strenuously object to. Many buildings, in fact all of our buildings, we've restored the foundations and they will last indefinitely. So I would have thought it would be helpful to have something in your report explaining why this foundation can't be restored, and that may well be the case, but there's no photos and no particular verbiage explaining why it can't be restored. Thanks.
Leslie, do you want to respond to that? Okay, sure.
Sure. Through you, Mr. Chair. The replacement of the stone foundation was a concern of mine when the application came in originally. However, when we designated this property, it was a threat of demolition. We had a demolition application in, and it was a quick designation, which is not necessarily always the most thorough. So upon revisiting this property and looking again at its foundation, as I said, it's a very early building. It's also a very, very rough building. It was not built, it's sort of a pioneer style building. That does not mean that its stone foundation should be removed just, by virtue of the fact that it's old and rough, but the proponent had determined that the stone foundation was beyond repair for their purposes, as the stone foundation is not actually visible from the exterior of the building, which speaks to the fact that this demolition or this designation was done rather quickly. We probably wouldn't have included it if we did the designation now with more time. So that's sort of the reason that we determined that it was acceptable to replace the stone foundation. But I would agree with you that it's not always, or most of the time, it's not the appropriate route.
Okay, next on my list, Barry Podolsky.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On the whole, I think that the proposal is a sensitive expansion to this designated historic building, and I think that it's going to ensure that the neighborhood sees the continuance of the legacy of the Charles Billings House. I think that the way in which the new addition is connected to the surviving 80% of the historic building, I think is well done. So on the whole, I think that the staff report is something that I could support. A question which I would ask is whether or not the owner-developer would consider very, very carefully restoring the wood clapboard and the wood details of the surviving portion of the house, and consider, as Heritage Ottawa suggested in the proposal, to ensure that the windows that are in locations where the historic windows were would actually be reinstated as they were, not in the last round, but as they were historically, if there's evidence, so that you have kind of a wonderful neighborhood composition which is respectful to the massing, but at the same time you have some impressive restoration of the details of this simple cottage. So if there's opportunity to do that, I think in the discussions that I would advocate that you introduce that and urge them to do it.
Okay, thank you very much. Leslie, you want to respond to that?
I would just say through you, Mr. Chair, that I believe that is the intention of the applicant, is to restore the wood siding where there are certain sections of it where the demolition of the other portions of the building has occurred, where it won't be able to be restored, but it will be replicated in kind. And in terms of windows, the window openings are part of the designation, so they will be protected, and the new windows that will go in there will, to the best of our ability, be appropriate to the character of the existing house. But again, there's very little evidence about this house because it's so early.
Councillor Moffat.
Thank you. I realize that when adding on to a heritage building that you want to have some delineation between what's new and what's old. I'm just curious as to why we wouldn't have done more to maintain the symmetry of the house and the location with how the gable entrance was essentially located. Now it's kind of almost tucked away, especially when you look at it from the front standpoint. It's just kind of off to the side. And even from standing in Laneway, it's not central, right? Where that was a kind of a feature of the cottage-style house. Why wouldn't we have done more on the design of the home to maintain that feature and keep it centrally located on that part of the building?
Okay, thank you very much, Leslie.
That may be something also that the architect can speak to. They are here today, but the symmetry is definitely something that we considered. It wasn't included as a heritage attribute in the Statement of Cultural Heritage Value because, as I said, the building was expanded in 1857. So the original building actually wasn't symmetrical, but it's pretty close. What you see there now is pretty close to being symmetrical. It's not exactly symmetrical, but it's something that I pushed the applicant on, and we got closer to it. But it was a bit of a balance of trying to save a large mature tree in the rear yard and maintaining the symmetry of the house. So the architect may be able to speak further to the design choices.
Okay, thank you very much, Leslie. I think with that, we'll move to our registered speakers. We have two. So the first speaker on the list is Leslie Maitland, the president of Heritage Ottawa. I'd ask Ms. Maitland to come on up so we can hear from her. Good afternoon and welcome to the subcommittee.
Well, thank you very much. And if I may beg your indulgence for a moment, I would just like to take a few moments to wish all of you a Happy New Year and to thank you very much for volunteering to return to this committee, the citizen members and Councillor Moffat to return, and also to thank the new councillors for joining this committee. This committee had a great deal of success in its short incarnation, and I expect the next 4 years will also be successful, and Heritage Ottawa commits to supporting this committee as much as possible, and also to thank staff for all of their work. So thank you. To return to 187, Billings, overall, Heritage Ottawa does support this application. I think they've done a brilliant job putting an addition onto a site that is very difficult to deal with, very difficult indeed. And I want to thank thank you for raising some of the questions that we raised in our original comments on the drawings. My one last comment is it may sound like nitpicking, but I think for the sake of making a well-informed recommendation, it's worth noting, and I think Councillor Moffat touched on it when he questioned the loss of centrality of the original structure. The 20% that's being lost, that 20% isn't being lost to save the significant tree. It's nowhere near the significant tree. It's being lost to accommodate new building space. Well, if that's the reason, then let's frankly say that. I mean, we may, council may, has the right to partially demolish a heritage property, but let's make sure that the reasoning we're offering is the correct reasoning, similar to citizen members Smallwood's comment that we're not removing the foundation because it's structurally flawed, because the report doesn't say that. We're not removing this 20% because it's structurally flawed. We're removing it because it's where we want the new construction to go, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. That's the only clarification I'm looking for here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that statement. Any questions for Leslie Maitland? No? Okay, thank you very much. Our second speaker registered to speak is Todd Duckworth, who represents the architect, Barry J. Hoban and Associates. Mr. Duckworth. Welcome to the subcommittee, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'll touch briefly on the question that was raised, particularly regarding the near symmetry of the existing house and our rationale for the design that we ultimately proposed. The retention of the tree in the rear yard is one of the factors that was raised through the cultural heritage impact statement that was produced by Roberts and Martin Architects. It was one of the points that were raised, and it's correct that we are quite a ways from the tree, but the root structure itself was something we wanted to avoid as well. But that was part of it. The other, in general, the design was a balancing act between retaining the best portions, the best aspects of the heritage home, while also producing a viable finished product in conjunction with the addition. We wanted to create or retain a significant rear yard. And so all of these things factored together. And as Leslie mentioned, the design that's here today is the product of an ongoing discourse about how much removal of the existing building and the position of the new portion. And so there was, like I said, an ongoing dialogue, and this was where we ended and had the support of both RMA as well as the heritage planning.
Okay. Is that it?
Yep.
Okay, great.
That's how I would respond to the.
Any questions for Mr. Duckworth in terms of the proponent's approaches or views?
Yeah. Go back to the question.
Yeah, Councilor.
So back to what I was saying earlier, looking at it, why the removal of 20%? Why get rid of the centrality of the front entrance?
When we reviewed, or when we took on the latest iteration of the design, with the view to retain as much of the existing structure as possible, while also retaining the integrity of our design intention to keep the heritage house at the prominent location on the site. If you look at the site plan, you'll see we took the new addition and pushed it as far back on the site as the zoning will allow. So the rear of the proposed addition goes right to the rear setback, and what we found was that there's 80% that allows us, or 80% allowed with that strategy, and we thought it was important to retain the glass link between the new structure and the old to create a distinction between the two. Again, this aspect pushed the new house further back on the site. So to fit within the existing zoning envelope, we believe this is the balance between retention of existing building and the proposal of the new.
So your priority was creating new space versus retaining the existing space?
It was to find a balance between retaining the best aspects of the heritage building and to propose a viable...
Right, but your starting point was never 100% of the existing building. Like, you never came at it from that angle.
We looked at two essential strategies. Looking at the site, there's two ways that we viewed to site an addition on this building. One was to build next to the building, to build west of it, which would allow for 100% retention. The other was to build behind, which doesn't allow for 100% retention. We felt that to build behind, in view of all the heritage aspects and characters of the house, was preferable in that it retains the western frontage, and it allows the existing house to be far more dominant on the site than if you would imagine a building of similar, or an addition of similar size built to the west of, so that's where the driveway is in those renderings, and parallel to the existing building. The existing building would be able to be retained, but we felt that its presence on the site would be diminished by the more prominent addition. So those two strategies, looking at where the room on the site was, to either build behind or build beside, we felt it preferable to build behind. When looking at all of the heritage, the stated heritage attributes together, and one of the most significant being its orientation away from the street is one of the cultural pieces of cultural value.
Yeah. You don't have to answer this, but I'm fairly certain you could have designed something like that and retained 100% of the building. I mean, I've seen all the things that you do, that Barry Hoban Architects does, with all the applications that have come forward, and I'm fairly certain that you could have come up with something that stayed within your setbacks and kept 100% of the building and built on the rear and had the garage. So anyways, you don't have to answer that because you've already stated it, but that's my opinion.
Okay. Any other questions or comments from Mr. Duckworth? No? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We actually have a third speaker who's registered to address the subcommittee. I'd ask Nina Decker to come forward, please. And Ms. Decker is a neighbor. Welcome to the subcommittee.
Thank you.
And the floor is yours.
Thank you. I live in a neighborhood. I submitted comments, but I just wanted to take a moment to address the committee. This is a really historic house, one of the few remaining in the neighborhood, and I really appreciate that it was designated a heritage house. And it is nice to see that people are wanting to bring it back up to status again. However, I want to point out, and even further the point that Ms. Leslie made, we're not reducing the house by 20% to save a tree. We're doing it to build a new addition. But I think council should know that the lot was on a double lot. It is one of the biggest lots on the street. But the developer who purchased the property chose to sever it, thereby limiting his own expansion room, because he wanted to put two buildings on it. It could easily have had a building to the side connecting the two, as it was said, building to the west, So it appears to us, as people in the neighborhood, that the developer is just attempting to maximize his profits by building two houses on the property and thereby taking part of the heritage property that was just created heritage. So I just don't understand why they're allowed to demolish any of the property. The expansion room was known beforehand. The developer chose to sever, but then he has to deal within the limitations and retain 100% of the heritage building. I just don't see a justification for truncating the building at this point in time when there's plenty of land surrounding the whole building. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We appreciate your contribution. Any questions or comments for Ms. Decker? No? Okay, thank you very much for joining us. Okay, so committee members, any other thoughts, observations, comments? Mr. Smallwood?
I guess my feeling, I support the Heritage Ottawa comments on it, and I guess the main feeling I'm left with is that this is not a restoration project. There are components of restoration in it. I think Leslie's comment that this was a hasty designation probably is part of the reason why we are where we are. I certainly was struck with the history of the property. It is obviously an important property in the heritage of the city. its relationship with the Billings family and the age of the building. So I guess I'm torn between the concerns that I have as a result of what's being proposed, and certainly Councillor Moffat's comments about the loss of the symmetry of it, with the realization, I guess, that the site is a developable site, and it appears that there is at least an attempt to recognize the importance of the site. It's a compromise, and I can't say that I'm happy, but there you go.
Maybe just a question for Leslie, and I'm going to be asking a lot of questions in the early stages, so please excuse me. But the issue of the severance, was that ever before this committee, or was that a Committee of Adjustment issue?
Severances are dealt with by the Committee of Adjustment.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Cloutier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and congratulations on your chairmanship. Want to thank staff for briefing the councillors so well, and I just want to bring to the attention of the committee, if I may, that this development is compliant in all way, shape, and form of setbacks and other requirements of the Planning Act. It's simply the heritage designation. I've consulted with the community. There's members of the Alta Vista Community Association here that could speak, if required, to this application. I think the developer, the owner, has made an effort to, in dialogue with our staff, to alter the design from a 30% removal rate to a 20% removal rate. And the effort to assist to repair and restore, with respect to Mr. Smallwood's comments, to restore the heritage portion of the property with like material, and on that basis, I would, if I may, I don't know if I can recommend, but. Ask that the application be looked at favorably by the subcommittee. Thank you.
Thanks, you. Thank you very much. Councillor Wilkinson.
I just want to go back to one thing that has been sort of bothered me as it went on. It had to do with the stone foundation. The question was asked, but you never told us completely why you said it was okay to move it. I go to a church that was built in 1839. Our stone foundation has been standing up since then, and it's fine. They can be fine. Is it possible in the old part of the building, I'm not talking about the expanded new part, but in the old part, to retain that stone foundation while they're doing the work? Because otherwise, if you're going to start changing the foundations and things like that, it could be difficult. Or is that step going to stay there?
Ms. Collins.
Through you, Mr. Chair. The reason that we determined that it was appropriate for the stone foundation to be replaced was, one, the applicant requested that they be able to do so, so we evaluated that request. And two, as I mentioned earlier, because this designation was done hastily, the stone foundation was included, but in fact, if I was to do, and I wrote it, so I'm owning up to it, but if I was to do that designation over again today, I likely would not have included the stone foundation because the interior of the building is excluded, and the stone foundation is not visible from the outside. So that was sort of our rationale for deeming it to be appropriate. I think the architect could speak to whether or not they would be willing to retain it. And I mean, the committee has the ability to incorporate conditions into its approval. So if that's something that the committee feels very strongly about, it could say that it would approve the application conditional upon retention of the stone foundation.
Just was thinking it's kind of tricky to replace the foundation. You have to lift the house up and things, and the damage can happen when that happens. And so I don't want to impose something that's going to be difficult. On the other hand, if the existing house can be left as much as it is, the new part obviously will have a new foundation. Is it because they want a higher headroom, or is there a room? Because those old foundations tend to be. I used to live on the street next to it. We didn't have a very high basement, and it had stone foundation.
Yeah, the basement is very low. in this house.
And that's probably part of the reason for doing it?
I would imagine they're trying to gather more living space, but again, the architect would be better to answer that question.
Because I have seen some places, too, where you have 2 different levels of basements, too. Mr. Chair, I was wondering if we could get an answer to that, because the question was raised earlier, and I didn't think we got the full answer to it before I make the decision. I'd rather like to know if there's a really solid reason for doing that, in which case I'll be okay with it, or...
So what you're wondering, Councillor Wilkinson, is whether you can get an answer from the architect as to why a decision was made not to retain the stone foundation? Well, I'm flexible. Mr. Duckworth, would you mind coming back up? So I assume you heard the question that was put to you, which is, could you just speak briefly to the rationale for not maintaining the stone foundation and replacing it instead with a concrete one?
The decision to replace the stone foundation was one that was asked by our client, and his primary concern was the long-term stability and weather performance of the stone foundation itself. And the reason, to follow up on what Leslie said, the reason it was deemed an acceptable replacement was the stone foundation is imperceivable from the outside. It's not visible at all. And so when that became apparent, when we both did our site visits to see if the stone foundation was in fact visible, when it became apparent that it wasn't, it was no longer considered a pertinent heritage issue.
Okay.
Just add to that, Mr. Chair. You're going to have to lift the house up, I take it, to replace that foundation. When you finish, is the house going to be at the same elevation now, or are you going to be lifting it? Because that would, in fact, change its visual appearance.
It will be at the same elevation that it currently is. That was one of the discussion points that we had with heritage planning, and the elevation of the house will not change in the finished product.
And what happens if you do damage in raising it? Because these older buildings, I know my church was built in 1839, and it's on big wooden beams, which are still holding it up okay, but we start moving things around, it makes a difference.
Well, I don't want to speak too much about the construction procedures themselves, because they're not my domain, but there in fact is some existing deformities to the structure, particularly visible in the roof, and it was speculated in the cultural heritage impact statement that had to do with settling that had occurred in the foundation. So there's a certain amount of repairs that will need to take place to strengthen the structure regardless, and I'm certain that the procedure for lifting the house, replacing the foundation, and putting it back to its current elevation will be done carefully and methodically so that the existing structure is retained.
Okay, thank you very much for that answer. Mr. Moore, does this relate to Mr. Duckworth? Okay.
Thank you. I wanted to make a comment. There's others who may disagree, but it would be my position that your advice to your client should be that a stone foundation can last indefinitely and be maintained indefinitely, and that there is no reason for stability of the property to change the foundation. I understand and appreciate Leslie's comment that it's not a visible issue, and my concern raised by Councillor Wilkinson was that the attempts to change the foundation may indeed do some damage to the property, and that was one of the reasons why I raised it. So I do think it's important, unless somebody wishes to say otherwise, that we understand that stone foundations, it's not an issue of stability or long-term ability of the foundation to perform. Your client may feel that, but I would strongly disagree with that position. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Duckworth, for joining us.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, if there are no other comments or questions, I think we're going to move to the motion at hand, which is that the Build Heritage Subcommittee recommend that Planning Committee recommend that Council approve the application to alter 187 Billings Avenue according to the drawings submitted on October 23rd, 2014. 2, to issue the heritage permit with a 2-year expiry date from the date of issuance. And 3, to delegate authority for minor design changes to the General Manager, Planning and Growth Management Department. So, all in favor? Oh, you want to have more discussion on it? Please.
On the motion, I just want to say that I support the motion, but I wanted to ask the question of staff, if I could, about whether or not the other half of the designated property will be, when a proposal is made for that, will that be coming to the Built Heritage Subcommittee, and will there be guidelines on it? Could you just explain that so we understand it?
Sure. Through you, Mr. Chair, it will not come to this committee because it is not part of the designated property. So the portion of the property that is designated is this half of the lot. The severed portion is not part of the designated property. So the bylaw is attached to this half of the lot. Depending on what is proposed there in the future, it might require a cultural heritage impact statement because it's adjacent to a designated property. But likely, if it's a single-family house, you know, that meets all the zoning, there wouldn't be any other requirement other than a building permit. So the short answer is no, it will not come here.
I would just add at this point that this is one of the lacuna, perhaps, in the mandate issues that we have as a subcommittee that we're encountering this problem, and Ms. Decker raised the issue articulately, and I think when we get to other business, I'll be raising the question as a mandate one for us as to how we deal with these issues moving forward. Any other questions or comments before we put the motion to a vote? No? Okay, in that case, so you heard the motion before you. All in favor? So we have 1, 2, 3, 4.
Just say
Okay.
carry. Just
Carried?
say carry.
You don't want to?
I'll get dissent.
Okay. Okay, so all opposed?
Yes.
1, 2, 3. Okay.
Well, let's just do yeas and nays then.
Okay. Thank you for your help, by the way. So yeas, we have 4.
Yeah, she'll do the roll call.
Okay. So
She'll do
go ahead.
Member Quinn?
Yes.
Member Smallwood?
No.
Member Moffat?
No.
Chair?
Yes. We've got an old
I know. I just realized that.
so we'll just have to do this manually.
I'll just show you as.
So, I think Councillor McKenney.
Councillor McKenney?
Yes.
And Councillor Wilkinson.
Councillor Wilkinson?
So it looks like the motion carries 4-3.
4-3.
So I guess we'll move on to the next agenda item. Thank you very much, and thank you very much to the members of the public for your attendance and participation on this item. So we're moving to item 2 of the agenda, which is an application to demolish 140 Howick Street, a property designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act and located in the Rockcliffe Park Heritage Conservation District. This application is before us as a result of a fire that took place in mid-December. I don't remember the actual date, but I can attest that it did take place because I went and visited the property while the fire was taking place, and it was very much in flames, so we know that this is indeed the case. So there is, as a result of the fire, an application to demolish the property. That demolition permit requires the approval under the Ontario Heritage Act of Council. So we as a subcommittee are faced with the question before us as to whether we're going to recommend that this demolition permit be granted. We have heard from one member of the public on this, two. We've heard from Heritage Ottawa and the Rockcliffe Park Residents Association. Neither opposes the demolition, so are there any questions or comments on this question? Please, Mr. Smallwood.
I just had a comment I wanted to make because I thought it was important to make it, is that the owners of this property It's a really sad story. They were really dedicated towards preserving it. In fact, to the extent that when they originally came forward and we had some concerns about the proposal, they actually changed architects to try to make sure that they would be sympathetic and do a sympathetic restoration to the house. So it's a very sad story that we're at where we are, but we really have no choice now but I think to approve the demolition of the house.
Any other questions or comments? Mr. Podolsky?
In the Heritage Ottawa comments on this application to demolish the house, there was the request that a drawing record be provided, and I just wanted to know whether or not that has been committed by the owners to do that prior to the demolition.
We actually have the existing elevations, the as-builts from their previous application. So we have them on file already. So I will prepare, per Heritage Ottawa's comments, I'll prepare a package of items to send to the archives.
Okay, if there are no more questions and comments, then again, the motion before us is that the Built Heritage Subcommittee recommend that Planning Committee recommend that Council approve the demolition of the building at 140 Howick Street in the Rockville Park Heritage Conservation District. Carried?
Carried.
Carried. Okay, thank you very much. So the next item on our agenda is other business. And what I thought I would mention here, we did have the relevant excerpts of the governance report circulated to members so that everybody had a chance to review what some of the proposed ideas and suggestions were for this committee moving forward. So within that excerpt, there were a series of ideas, including whether this committee would want to take an opportunity to discuss those various ideas and suggestions in order to be ready by April 1st to embark on perhaps, if we choose to agree, a more robust mandate for this group. Now, within the report, what I did is I articulated 6 sort of main themes that I think we're going to have to address. And the proposal that I'm going to put before you now is that we take some time during our February meeting to discuss them amongst ourselves. And the reason why we would do that is we are up against a little bit of a tight deadline. So if we have a discussion at our February meeting, the idea would be we would turn that into relevant motions, which we would then approve at our March meeting, and that would have to be early enough that that could be approved by Council before April 1st, which is the date by which we've been asked to do this work. So again, with your agreement, what I would propose to do is circulate a very short discussion paper before our February meeting, which would just outline how we could structure such a discussion, and we would make sure that public delegations are invited to speak on each. And I'll just go through now what I sort of gleaned from the governance report that I think, the elements that I think are relevant, and there are 6. So the first is the idea of looking back at the LACAC terms of reference and seeing if there are elements contained therein which we should consider including eventually in our terms of reference. And one example given in the governance report was identifying properties and areas in the city that may merit protection. That was one example given. So again, looking at previous incarnations of this group and seeing if there are best practices or examples of where we should consider undertaking some additional work in terms of our terms of reference. The second was the issue of seeing whether this committee could have the mandate to look at planning applications that involve a heritage overlay. This is a role and responsibility that this subcommittee currently does not undertake, and I think those of you who were on the committee before experienced a few instances where I understand you felt that that was perhaps a lacuna in terms of the ability of this group to respond. The third issue is a mechanism that would allow the Built Heritage Subcommittee and relevant staff to be available to the staff and members of other standing committees and council for issues related to heritage. And so again, that isn't a specific mandate item currently within our terms of reference in the governance report, based, I think, largely on interviews with members of the subcommittee at the time, staff and others, suggest that that might be an item that we'll want to have a discussion about. The fourth was definitional issues, whether we need to have a discussion of when we talk about heritage, what that encompasses, and similarly with the term built heritage. So that was the fourth issue raised in the governance report. The fifth related to transparency in staff reports, related to the approval or denial of requests for heritage designation. And clearly, some who were interviewed in the governance report felt that it would behoove us to have a better and a more transparent rationale from staff in terms of how those decisions were arrived at, and perhaps appendixed to reports as they came forward. And the last item was the issue of the cultural heritage impact statements, whether they too should always be appended, whether or not they could do more. I guess the question would be whether we would have a greater opportunity to offer opinions or comments on the relative merit of cultural heritage impact statements. So that was a sixth issue. Again, I'm just trying to summarize the relevant parts of the report, which I think would merit discussion. I'm not opining on either the pros and cons of this. I don't think now is the time because we're not ready to have that discussion. But what I would propose is some version of that frame could be put before members of the committee in advance of the February meeting, and that would serve in some ways to help frame the discussion we would have, and we would invite members of the public to comment on each of those six if they so choose. So my question to you right now is, do you think I have the 6 questions properly characterized? If there are additional items that you think we should discuss, I'm happy to hear them, or ways that you would change the characterization that I've used of the governance report. Mr. Smollett?
Since I raised some of those issues when I was in the interview, I absolutely do have a comment. My hope was that we would, through staff, engage somebody who would help us come to grips with these things, because I think there are things that we don't want to be trying to reinvent the wheel, and I think there are people with the expertise out there that could help us with it. So I would feel more comfortable if we were able to get someone who would be able to facilitate this for us, and somebody who is experienced, and somebody hopefully who has some background with these issues in Ottawa. So that would be my hope, is that we would be able to ask staff for some for their input in terms of what who could help us with that, because my concern otherwise is we might be coming forward and not covering some of the things that I believe we absolutely need to cover.
Okay. Thanks for the suggestion. Any other comments or observations? Mr. Podolsky?
Yeah, I think that it's very appropriate for the next meeting, because I think that this new committee of Planning Committee needs to get a more synoptic view based on our experience of the gaps that were discovered in the last 2 years, and to be able to cope with them and get ahead of the curve. So I agree with this review at the next meeting, and I think that input from the public at that time would be very helpful to be able to see whether there are issues that they think should be addressed. I'm sure Heritage Ottawa has some views on that as well. And if we could add to that agenda a report from staff on the upcoming work program for the next year, so that at the same meeting, the Built Heritage Subcommittee can get a forecast of what is expected to come to the committee over the course of the year, that is basically staff initiated rather than just applications that come in from developers of the public. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? The Deputy Clerk?
Chair, I just need to clarify that Council, in fact, has already approved the process improvements included in the governance report, specifically the facilitated session. So, in other words, the template is already approved, the notion of a template. The fact that cultural heritage statements be included as an appendix for relevant reports is approved, and as has the provision of the biannual report on requests that were denied plus a rationale. Where the facilitated session has a specific mandate is with respect to the heritage overlay and how that will be worked through the committee in terms of from a process perspective and what's there as part of the discussion. So I just wanted to clarify with your remarks that several of these things have already been approved by council, so they're not really optional.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Thank you for the clarification. I think what I would anticipate is that there needs to be some discussion of process and how these things are imbued within the work of the actual subcommittee, and I think that kind of discussion would be useful. I would also note that our next meeting, which is scheduled for February 12th, I anticipate is going to be probably not a short one. We expect to have a heritage designation application before us, which I suspect will merit significant public interest. So you may, I think our options are we prepare for a longish meeting. We would deal with the regular agenda first and then have a facilitated discussion second. Or if members prefer, I could look into the possibility of finding a date for an additional meeting. I say I would need to, I can't identify what that date would be now, but it probably would have to be in February, again, in order for us to meet the various timeline deadlines that we have. So are there strong views on that?
Well, let's try to do it at the meeting, and if they take more time, then we have to, after that, we could set up a meeting rather than trying to do it ahead of time, because you can set up meetings so easily.
Okay. Does that make sense? Okay. So, yeah, so you may just, again, on February 12th, anticipate that you may be spending a good portion of your day here in this room. And again, in terms of the agenda preparation, we will specify how that portion of the meeting is going to be run and facilitated and characterized. And I'll probably have individual conversations with you between now and then just to make sure that that meets with your approval and ideas. So with that, that was the one item under other business. The second, Rosemary, I may ask you, can you clarify, we've got dates for the Ottawa Architecture Awards, correct? There we go. Okay. Any other items of business that others wanted to mention? Yeah. That's good.
Just not that it's necessarily today, but just the decision on the position of vice chair for the committee?
Yes. Yeah, I propose that we take that item up at our next meeting. Yeah. Thank you for reminding me to note that. Okay. So with that, we can adjourn the meeting, and we'll see each other on Thursday, February the 12th. Thank you very much.